Every story from Shortwave, NPR Science Podcast, starts with a question. Like, why do we have nightmares? How does AI affect my energy bill? At NPR, we are here for your right to be curious about the world around you. Follow Shortwave wherever you get your podcasts, because the more you ask, the more interesting the world gets.
Think is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you might not know. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. Pop over to Progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with discounts that are easy to come by. In fact, 99% of their auto customers earn at least one discount. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates national average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary. The writer George Saunders is fascinated by death, not killing or violence or even grave illness, so much as the experiences of souls inhabiting some cosmic space between life as a corporeal being and whatever punishment or reward awaits them. There's a lot of creative potential there. From KERA in Dallas, this is Think. I'm Chris Boyd. Saunders' 2017 novel Lincoln in the Bardo, which won that year's Booker Prize, mined the liminal space between the living and the dead by imagining the title character ravaged by grief over the death of his 11-year-old son during Lincoln's presidency. Saunders' new book, Vigil, takes place within the mind of a climate change-denying oil tycoon, near death and seemingly unconscious. K.J. Boone is visited by two different ghosts. One, a young woman who seeks to comfort him because he's a human made vulnerable by his own demise. The other, a French inventor desperate to force Boone to acknowledge the environmental ravages enabled by his life's work. The book is a wild and fascinating ride, and it raises questions for all of us about free will, culpability, and who is worthy of redemption. I spoke with George Saunders about the new book recently at a live event at the Dallas Museum of Art. Here is our conversation.
Welcome.
Nice to be here, with you especially.
It's nice to be here with you as well. This story takes place at the deathbed of a very bad man. For purposes of this discussion, for people who haven't read the book, what do we need to know about K.J. Boone?
He's a big stinker. Yeah. He's a guy. He's part of that generation of now sort of we can be nostalgic about these stinkers from the 2000s because things have gotten worse. But he was kind of a Bush era denier, that first generation of people that figured out the rhetoric of how to do it, which then turns out they actually borrowed it from tobacco. There was the same PR groups and same people. So he's that kind of person, but I think outwardly probably pretty high functioning. You know, he's got a family. There's a great Ezra Klein piece with Masha Guess, and they made the distinction that generation of stinkers were still kind of cloaked in Enlightenment values. So if you caught them lying, they might blush, you know. And now we've moved well past that, but he's sort of that generation of outwardly respectable people, and so we kind of meet him on the night of his death, and he's not feeling great, but he's feeling okay, about what he's done. I mean,
does he believe he's a good guy, or is that just not something he's even thought to question?
Well, that was the big question of the book, because as soon as you start trying to narrate from inside his head, that's it. Do people know that they're bad, or have they narrated themselves into something else? And I think it's, from my own experience, it's the latter. When I've been a stinker myself many years ago, you always have a narrative that. So in other words, I don't really believe in the Cruella de Vil model of evil, which is I'm going to be evil today. I can't wait. But that was the big thing, is to see, well, what does he think? And I think what I concluded was he's got a real encasing of both denial and self revving up. He's got a bunch of stories he tells himself, and also the world is flattering him as well. So I think the beginning of the book, I think he really feels, and Jill, who's his ghost. I can see into his head. And she says to us, yeah, he feels pretty good,
She's really interesting. She herself is a ghost. She died as a young newlywed. She's kind of assigned to bring him comfort as he's dying. And this is something she's done many times before and does not think this one will be a challenge.
Right. She think the way I write books is I start and then they start talking back. And so early on, I thought she was really kind of perfect. She was a 10 in terms of virtue. And as the book wrote itself, she came down a bit. And by the end, I'm like, I'm not sure that she's ever really comforted anybody. But she thinks she's one of those people. She thinks she is, So that was interesting to see her kind of evolve. But so my idea of her was, it comes to me through her voice. And I kind of thought of her as kind of a 22-year-old back when I was a teenager, kind of a working class person, kind of cheerful. And one of the things that hit me early was, I'm 67 now, and I'm thinking back to friends I knew who passed away after high school, to a handful of people. And at this age, you think, oh my goodness, I never could have imagined how much they missed, in that time. So I had a lot of sympathy for her and a lot of love for her. And, so she's kind of there to comfort by her own. That's her idea of what she's going to do, and we find out.
Along comes another ghost, the Frenchman, who, as far as I can tell, he's like a fictional stand-in for Jean-Joseph Etienne Lenoir, the guy who invented.
Well done, yes.
I went down a whole rabbit hole, George, to figure out who this was. This is the person who invented the internal combustion engine.
Yeah, and the way I do my extensive research is I Googled who invented the engine. It said, that's one number. Okay. I think there was a handful of people, but yeah. So he's a guy who invented the engine, felt pretty good about it, and then we found out later on his deathbed he went, "Sacre bleu," and now he's kind of roaming the afterlife, trying to kind of touchingly, I thought, trying to meet people like himself and urge them to repent. So he's I think this book in a way was an export of my kind of beginner Buddhist mind. So she's a certain idea of compassion, which we and I kind of believe her, but also there's a touch of what we call idiot compassion, which is like, somebody drives a spike through your head and you go, oh, thank you for the coat rack. It's that. And he's more like what we would call wrathful compassion, which is, if I'm really concerned for your well-being, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get you to wake up. And in the Tibetan tradition, there are some teachers who can be quite harsh. And their whole thing is that the ego is so strong that it has to really be hit, So he's maybe from that school of thought.
His sense of his own culpability, the Frenchman, is fascinating, because the real character that he's based on died in 1900 before anyone could have known what would be wrought by this invention. In some ways, you could call him an innocent. And it made me think about the actor who is also a writer, Stephen Tobolowsky, has said, you never know when a story begins. Like the significance of something that happens is not evident until the story is at its conclusion.
Oh, isn't that beautiful? Yeah. I think especially, I was reading about a little bit of amateur reading in neuroscience, and one of the things that really stuck with me was they now think that okay, so if you were blindfolded and put in this room, and then somebody took the blindfold off, what actually happens is in the back of your mind, you basically make a rough draft, like public space. And then your senses start working, so quick you can't imagine it, and it fills in the details. And at some point you go, literary event. Oh crap, But that's actually it's writing a novel. You have the rough draft, and then you refine it through specificity into something specific. But the kind of crazy thing is that is always a little after the fact. In other words, you're making this construct of this moment, which is not as seamless as it looks. It's just a series of quick data feeds. So one Buddhist teacher said that everything you think or feel is a memory. So in a certain way, that it means that our being in the world is always undercut with this incredible amount of uncertainty. And so all of our worry and our controlling is so sweet and so silly in a way, because this story that the mind is telling it's is always a little wonky. So with this Frenchman, you can imagine that he died. I invented the engine. And in the book, when he dies, he gets access to a kind of wisdom, a kind of presentiment of what's going to happen. So after this long, productive life of being the guy who invented the engine, you're like, oh no, I'm the guy who invented the engine.
As a writer, you do have to begin somewhere. How do you find your way to the beginning of the book? Do you always write in sequence from page 1 to page 200?
I do that. Usually it's kind of like, roughly speaking, it's blurting out a little text and messing with it until it feels, the word I always think of is undeniable. Like if somebody read that, they would believe it happened, or they'd see it. So that's a real lapidary kind of process where, and weirdly, what makes you not believe something, there's a whole bunch of stuff, but one is errors, or even small inefficiencies in expression. And especially if you feel the writer's agenda. I think that, if you feel the writer going, sit there while I take the manure truck of my ideas and drop it on you, any reasonable person then go, I'm going to go watch a video, So I think there's a whole suite of things that can dissuade the reader from continuing. I feel like I have to kind of get page 1 all set. So if you read it, you're going to go, all right, keep going. And then, so I kind of go sequentially from the beginning to the end. And sometime in that process, you will get to page 5 and go, oh, that's where it actually starts. And then you have to do that thing of just killing your darlings.
Did you have to break free of a desire to dump all your ideas about how the world should be in your books?
Yes, always. And that's, I think I'm sure in interviewing, there's a similar thing, because if you come in with an agenda, everyone feels it. And then the only thing that's happening is you lecturing. Whereas if you can get your agenda to disappear, and I would say in terms of writing craft, that's really what it is. That's the whole thing, is how can you get your agenda to diminish and your curiosity to increase. And what that actually means is if you're the reader and I'm the writer, if my agenda goes away, we're leaning into each other, because I'm not quite sure what's happening, but I'm trying to prepare the way for you so that when you come to it, it feels fresh, and theoretically you feel that. And so there's a connection that's friendly, So a lot of it, I think crafts just is, there's that, I always have these 3 mantras, but I'll just share one. Einstein said, no worthy problem is ever solved on the plane of its original conception. So if I say, my novel's about X, and then it is, everybody's bummed out. But if I say, my novel's about this, and the novel goes, no, I'm not, and you listen to it, then you get that kind of feeling of shared mystery that I think is actually what it's all about.
I had that experience reading. In the first few pages, it felt very much like, okay, this is going to be a tug of war between these 2 ghosts for the soul of this dying man. And then you complicate things by showing us K.J. Boone's childhood, when he doesn't have a lot of money, is pretty insecure, bright kid, but doesn't have it so easy. Suddenly you complicate it by making us care about this child.
Yeah. It's a dangerous thing, because fiction can definitely inspire that kind of empathy. And I think I think you have to be careful, because if I describe anybody's childhood, it makes us soften a little bit. And softening, I think, is almost 99% good. But I'm noticing that it's a little dangerous. You have to be careful to not use it as an auto empathy tool that might overwrite the actual truth of the character. So in this book, what I did, I tried to give that, and then also when he was a real jerk, let that happen. When I was in high school, there was a really wonderful guy, very good looking and athletic, just a charming person. And 4 or 5 years later, we got together, and he was living in his mom's basement in a tiny space. And he had a really good job, making a lot of money. I'm like, what's going on? And he was very frank, and he said that when he was young, they were very poor, like, lots of humiliation for him in school and other places. Really, really poor. And he said, at that point, I am never doing that again. And I'm not going to move out of my mama's basement until I have $1 million in the bank, So that hit me as when we see somebody who's excessive, you can kind of often, not always, but often look back to something at the outset that put them on that path in some way, So I thought of this KJ Boone as, I didn't want to make him a comic book villain. So I thought, well, okay, is there anything that happened to him that put him on this path,
What do we need to know about KJ Boone? He starts absorbing these lessons from powerful men around him. He's caddying, I guess, at the golf course in Cheyenne where he lives. And he learns that they believe that you should leave morality to the mere mortals.
Yeah. I don't believe that, but I mean, I think there was. I grew up in Chicago on the South Side, and there was a very male-centered time, and I think part of the undercurrent was special rules. I mean, there's lots of gangster kind of activity and mafia type stuff, not in our immediate neighborhood, but in the mythology. And so there was definitely, I picked up on that. And when I was in the oil business for a couple of years, and that was part of the feeling was this tribal thing. We were doing a really hard thing. I was in Asia in the oil fields, and it was very, for someone who'd never left the country, very exotic. And we really saw ourselves as kind of this, enlightened force that was going out ahead of our culture to bring back the resources. And so if we trampled on the local culture, that was all right, a little bit. It was kind of dashing or something. So I used a lot of that I'm not particularly proud of, but I thought, well, how does a person become somebody like him? Part of it is that you have a positive experience, a tribal experience or a feeling of being special. And that's kind of his deal.
It is always, you mentioned the kind of danger of softening a character. And I've thought so much, all fiction is somewhat manipulative, right? Because we have a point of view and a perspective in the same way that it's hard to believe that anyone has ever hoped that Tony Soprano is not about to get, caught by the cops for something he's doing. You stop and think, oh my God, this person deserves to be in prison. I mean, how much do you have to think about just revealing relatable details about characters will change the way we feel about them?
I mean, at one level, it's kind of true. I mean, if you look at the worst person you ever met, this happens to her. She lowers herself into the consciousness of the person who kills her, basically. I don't know, but it seems to me if you could be somebody else for 5 seconds, even somebody you really didn't like, that would be like acid 3.0, you'd know that you had a self that you maybe didn't know before. And then you'd see that from inside that person, it all makes sense, So I don't know how far I want to go with that. I mean, it's a very scary, it's what the book is about actually, is part of my mind says, I want to feel love and sympathy for everybody. And it says there's no cost for feeling love and sympathy for your worst enemy. In fact, it's a superpower. You could read their minds. If you're in a football coach, if you could read the mind of the opponent coach, that's great, So part of me really believes that, and that's what Joe believes. On the other hand, it's very easy to get run over in that mind state. So I'm kind of, especially, right now in this time, I love being like Johnny Compassion. It's, as someone who doesn't like conflict, it's great, I'm always smiling, then I'm not, but you see that, and I would say, for the example of Minneapolis, beautiful example of the fact that compassion has to have a spine, and so I can be okay at that, but I'm still learning. And so the book is me, I think, maybe kind of working that out a little bit,
Talk more about this idea of every human being an inevitable occurrence.
Yeah. This is something that, we talked about writing the book a page at a time. So I got to a certain point and the book said, George, you have to tell us how she died. I'm like, no problem. I'll do it tomorrow, And I narrated her death. And at that moment, there was this crazy thing that happened where she drops into the mind of the person who killed her. And she has this flash of unbelievable empathy for him. So, and this is an idea that I remember first having it as a little kid and strongly. And I also knew it was kind of insane, but I kept having it. And I'm not sure really where it started, but when I think about it, there was a moment in first grade when I was a really good reader, and I was in a Catholic school with all these super hot nuns. You know that school.
I went to a different kind of Catholic school.
Yeah, I know. Oh, I think I did too. But for me, I adored the nuns. I adored them, and they adored me because I was a good reader and I was very obedient. And so for me, school was just a carnival. I'd go in, read, be praised. It was great. So after a few days, I noticed there was a good friend of mine who I think he probably was dyslexic, and he was really struggling. And the nuns, there was a dark side to the hot nuns, which is that they were very stern, and they were beating the snot out of this poor kid, And I one day, I was kind of, we do this. I was like, oh, he's fine. I'm doing very well. He's fine, and I'm doing very well. And at one point, I saw him at the end of the day, turned away so no one would see this, and he was crying in class. And something in my mind went, that's weird. So his crying is related to this victorious feeling that I'm having. They're not unrelated. He didn't in the womb say, hey, could you please make me a terrible reader? And I also didn't say, hey, I'd love to be a great reader so the hot nuns will adore me. We just showed up, So this was all sort of fixed. And even if you add, this is the part where I think people get stuck. Even if you said, okay, but George, you worked hard at your reading. He should work harder. True, but there's a limit to that. And at that moment, I felt, yeah, but even his ability to become a better reader has been pre-installed in a certain sense. So it was a very confusing moment because now I couldn't feel so triumphant. And so that's kind of her point of view. And I actually believe that. I think if you look at our lives from a certain point of view, we really kind of are, since time only goes in one direction. Here's another example. If let's say that let's think of a person who is okay and you kind of like him, and his name is Al. Let's just say his name is Al, and he is a mansplainer, and he never pays his debts back on time. Other than that, he's okay. So Al is alive, and you say, Al, can you stop talking so I can get a word in, and also pay me my $10? And he kind of doesn't do it. He improves and he backslides. Okay, this goes on and on. Al has free will. Al dies. Al's lying right here. Al. He was a mansplainer. He never paid me back, but he was what he was. You feel a sympathy for him because time has stopped. And now if he should have been less of a mansplainer and should have paid his debts back, well, he didn't. Amen. So what do we feel about him? I feel like, how could he have been other than what he was? So that's kind of Jill's view. And mostly I kind of believe that. But anyway, so I got to that point in the book, put that in, kind of a philosophical section, and it was a big buzzkill. And every day I'd read it and go, oh, God, philosophy, and I'd take it out. And then the rest of the book would just wither. I couldn't think of anything. So I did it, that was probably in and out of the book 7 or 8 times. And finally I went, okay, book, I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to put that in there. And then the book went, thanks, finally. And then it formed around it. But it's one of the reasons the book is kind of a pitching ship, I think,
I want to go back to Al just briefly.
He's still dead.
You said Al had free will. Do you believe in free will?
When he's alive, it looks like he has free will. And we have to believe he does, because come on, Al, give me my money, And I think you can't live in Jill's view, because people get away with things then. So I think you have to say and in fact, to my friend, someone should say, and they did say, work on your reading. And I'm sure he did, and I'm sure he benefited somewhat. So it's kind of in philosophical terms, it's absolute versus relative. Absolute is, I don't really think there's free will, given that time only goes in one direction. If you had God's mind and you could look into every one of our histories, you could actually predict the next thing someone was going to do. But we don't have that, and we're stuck inside these little vessels, So to us, where are we going to go to dinner? It's an open question, So I think it's a sort of a point of view question.
As a novelist, you have created the universe that your characters inhabit, and you have a great deal of control over what they do and how things turn out. Do your characters have free will?
No. No, I mean they don't. they have the experiences that they do surprise you, but for me they only. It's kind of weird, but I don't think of them as like some writers say. She just told me that she wanted to do this, and I'm like, well, kind of. But for me, it's all about the sentences. So, you're writing along and you have a bit of text. And when you read it the next day, it just isn't quite right. So you adjust something or you cut something. And then another phrase comes in to fill that. And it says, fell in love with Jeremy. And it sounds perfect. She just fell in love with Jeremy. So for her, free will doesn't really enter into it. And at the end, when you're editing, it's much more about, I want them to do the thing that produces the most sparks or the most meaning. And so that's not really up to them. But in the process, you have to take into account everything they've told you about themselves so that they can do the most interesting thing. And it sounds kind of crazy, but it's mostly for me, it's just going through the manuscript so many times with my ear engaged and then trusting that if I just fix the language so it's that undeniable I mentioned earlier, then it'll have the illusion of life and it will have the feeling of free will in it, I think,
Do you save every version as you go along and make changes?
Yeah, I have a very OCD system, I save all the electronic copies and I print everything out. And that way I feel more freedom to go ahead, knowing I can always go back and find it. I couldn't actually because it's such a mess, but you say, I can always go back to that version. And then, yeah.
So we're at the bedside of this dying man. He's comatose. He doesn't, I don't think, say a word to anybody.
He's got one line, I think. Yeah.
But there's this wedding going on next door, and it is lively, and people are laughing, and they're arguing, and they're gossiping. What is the meaning of the wedding in this story?
It's just I got tired of him dying. Really. I'm joking, but I'm not, because there is something. When you're reading it's so beautiful, really. When you're reading something, our reading minds are so great. I almost say capacious, but that was a little bit pretentious. But they're big, and you can read a page, and you have so many bowling pins in the air. I mean, the plot, of course, the voice, but also there's like repeated sounds. There's colors. There's your own memories that have kind of been subtly invoked. So I think one of the principles of structure really is you're reading as if you're the reader, and you're noticing certain feelings that you're having. So to be at the deathbed for 6 scenes in a row, you start to get a little like, George, do you like being alive? And I say, I do, and I'm feeling the same way. Let's see what's outside. And then Paul and I had been to Mantua in Italy, and there's a place called the Palace of Po, which I think it's this crazy early attempt at holography that this prince did for his lover. He would sneak her out there, and they would have these wild bacchanals, and it was a really beautiful place that was kind of, even though it was a museum, you felt sensuality and life and joy. So I always wanted to put that in a book, but instead I thought, okay, let's have just a wedding, But sometimes it's a call and response. Like if it's like that joke, doctor, it hurts when I do this. Don't do that. So sometimes if you're in the deathbed, you just need a wedding to kind of lighten things up.
It's interesting because Jill is sort of drawn back there, and she's fighting really hard against this urge to remember what it was like to be alive. And I thought about Emily Webb from Our Town. Yeah, for sure. But this was another thing. It had its roots in the language, because when I first started this, I had just written Lincoln and the Bardo, which was an amazing experience to be inside that book. And I liked that weird format where there's a speech and then an attribution. And you can do all kinds of things. You can have two characters talking like this, and then you can step to the edge of the stage, and you can have
we can describe whole scenes from the past. So I thought, I'll do that again. That was pretty fun. So I went up to I have this writing shed, and I'm in there. And for about 3 months, I was working on this book, but in that format. So there were 2 ghosts who were coming to this dead guy. And, I worked pretty much just for fun. So I took one guy who I imagine had died here in Dallas in 1850 or 60, and he talked like the people in Lincoln and the Bardo, because I was used to that. And then I had this young girl who was from my neighborhood, and they were talking back and forth. And and I could just hear the reviews. And then I got to so there's about, I did that for a long time, and it was, a nice repartee. And one day I was reading it, and the writers in the room will recognize this. And I was reading it, and I went, I think this is boring. And the book said, no, don't go there. You read me yesterday, and it was fine, right? Go ahead. Oh, yeah, you're right. Came in the next day, reading it. No, this is boring. And the book said, well, maybe. Have you heard something? And so finally, at some point, you go, yeah, no, this is too slow. A younger writer would have said, let's choose one and cut the other. So I did. I chose the woman, and then I was about to cut the old guy's speeches, and I just liked them too much. He's talking in a very high diction, so I did what an older writer does, which is just put them in the same speech. And then I went, that sounds weird.
Yeah, I mean, so Jill is both.
Right. But at that point, she was, but she was wrong. You'd read along, oh, that's weird. Ugh. So, I mean, one of the things I learned from all these years of writing is if you have a problem in your book, don't say it's a problem. Just say it's a feature. And then you will, like when she would make the segue from this high diction to low, it was jarring and it was wrong. But at the same time, I thought, okay, let me just be patient and see why my subconscious gave this to me. So the working theory is even at the beginning, there was some kind of thing going on that I didn't know about. And finally, that wedding showed up. I'm like, haha, that's why, because she's not quite as dead as we think. She is this elevated angel, but she kind of doesn't want to be. So that was, for me, that was a big moment to realize that wedding was actually there for another reason, which was to kind of tempt her, to be 22 again and alive.
Reading a book that takes place at the vigil around a deathbed is an invitation to think about our own mortality. I like thinking about death because I think there's a lot there. Why do you like thinking about death?
I think it's because, well, two reasons. Death is life. It's like you get invited to this beautiful party and there's great food and wild things and sexual feelings and music, and someone comes up and goes, I'm going to kick you out, but I can't tell you when. That makes, to me, that makes it a better party. It's like, so that's
like musical chairs.
Yeah. Is it yet? Look for the tall guy in the black gown. Just stay away from him. But I do have that feeling. But then on a more quotidian level, and maybe as a indication or limitations as an artist, it just makes everything jangly, like even when I was writing stories, I kind of noticed every story early had a death in it because that makes it consequential. So we have to be careful with that. But I think death, and then also for me, the afterlife is, I don't know what the afterlife is, but to say, let's pretend that we do, it introduces an element of time that I really like. Like if we're sitting here in the museum, this used to be something else. And there were people probably who died here and are probably buried. I don't know, maybe probably are. So if we could let them into the conversation, it suddenly gets kind of interesting. And for me, I had an early Hemingway imitating period that I hated. I liked it, and it was terrible. I couldn't do it. I was always trying to take my life and put it in Hemingway. Like Nick walked into the Walmart. It was pleasant, like that. So for me, a big moment was when I've got to not do that. I don't know how to not do that. I don't know how to be funny. So if I introduce something like a ghost or a theme park, it's just like, okay, well, this is automatically comic. now you're going to find better language to use than you would have when you were in the Hemingway mode. So in some ways, it's just a mechanical thing. If I put a ghost in, I'm going to be interested,
Are the comic elements of your books about giving us a break from what is serious in them, or are they about giving yourself a break?
Yes, but both. I mean, when I was young, I always joked about, that was if I was uncomfortable, if I was bored, if I was at a funeral, it was always a coping mechanism. In fact, my first girlfriend said, "I'm breaking up with you because you always joke," and said I made a joke right away. But so for me, it's just, I think it's, I think this is right. A control freak, who likes to keep control and therefore explain and be sure, and that has to be disrupted. And the only way I can reliably disrupt it is to be funny, because funny, then it kind of explodes the control. And I know how to be funny, and it's not always nice, and it's not always in fact, it's usually not. It's usually an acknowledgement of something that we have noticed but don't want to talk about. So in a kind of a mechanical way, if I can get myself to be funny, it pushes open the door for what I really think to come through. And some of that I don't even know that I think it, and I wouldn't even necessarily want to be thinking it. But with the door kicked open with humor, things start happening. So that was an early craft trick, was just have your Hemingway voice and put it in the Virgin Mary theme park. And suddenly you can't be that serious controlling guy. The story's already kind of screwed up and misshapen, so therefore the humor can come through, Yeah.
I know you're a Buddhist now, but you were raised Catholic. Catholicism teaches that anybody, any sin, bar none, can be forgiven, but you have to be sorry.
Yes.
And he's not sorry.
He's not. And and also, to me, it was interesting because he did so much that was really bad, and he can't move and he can't speak. So can he be redeemed? And I think so. I was thinking about that Tolstoy story, Death of Ivan Ilyich, and that was one that, speaking of how much we like death, Tolstoy heard that there was a neighbor of theirs who screamed for 3 straight days at the end of his life, and he was like, "Oh, interesting," that because he's a writer. But then in the story, it's kind of beautiful because this guy who's not a really bad guy, he's kind of just very conventional, and his conventionality has kind of kept him from connecting with the people in his life. So at a certain point, he goes, "There's no way I didn't live right. So why am I suffering? So it's not fair, Then some time goes by, and he says, "Okay, maybe I didn't live right." And he sits on that for a while. And then finally he says, this so beautiful, he says, if I acknowledge that I didn't live right, that must logically imply that there is a right way and that I might be able to get to it. And at that point, things start to happen fast. But any reader feels that as redemption. You're rooting for him to just have that moment of just realization that he was wrong. This guy, he doesn't, well, he might or might not get there.
It is interesting to think about the possibility of a deathbed redemption for someone like this, because other than anyone concerned about his immortal soul and wherever that might go, it changes nothing.
It changes nothing, except, this is where this book is interesting for me, because it's been reviewed all over the place. Great, terrible. Makes a lot of agitation, and I'm not. I think it's partly because I don't know the answer to that. If you think about, this is kind of corny, but if you think about Hitler, and you're in the bunker, what do you want to happen? What I think I want is for him to go, "Oh my God, I'm a terrible sinner," and that would be, it would be hell, I think, but it would also be, in some way, that's better, much better than what I think happened. Because I'm right, boom. That I can't stand, So I think I don't know the answer. Well, what do you think? Well, do you feel like, is there redemption at that point for somebody that late in the game?
I think like you, I want there to be, because it just seems right. And because although I like to think that KJ Boone's sins are worse than anything I could do.
They are.
Who knows?
They are, for sure.
It's like this question of if everyone is forgivable, then no one is unforgivable. And that means that some terrible things are not unforgivable, and that's hard to live with.
Yeah. But I think you hit on it, because I'm thinking that one of our American issues is denial. And I think you can see
I disagree.
You can see it at the, yeah, no way. Yeah. I think that's really funny. I think if you go up even to the top levels now, what you see is a reluctance to just turn to the truth and go, yes, I don't deny that anymore. So I think for me, as a person of a certain age, that's what I really want to get rid of, is any kind of sense of denial in the name of self-protection. Because I think that's what really, not only in death, but in life, it's very corrosive, so if you could be, and fiction really is kind of training in anti-denial, because in the way we talked about earlier, if I am denying the experience of the reader, we have a problem. And if I'm insisting that the book has to go the way I wanted it to, in spite of your experience with it, we've got a problem. So that's denial. So I think for me, I think if there is salvation, if at the last moment, even the worst person says, oh my God, I see it. I mean, when we were Catholic kids, that was kind of what hell was. Well, it was the absence of God, but it was also, you are now you see that movie of your life. And every little increment of unkindness or inattention or cruelty, you see it. And depending on how you lived, it could be good or it could be bad, So I think it's denial and hell and redemption are all kind of tied up together.
So what is compassion with backbone?
I think for me, right now, Minneapolis is a really high example of that, because it wasn't wimpy. It didn't lurch over into violence, and the basis of it was community, which is, the trust. I trust that you're going to be nonviolent, be with me, and that multiplied by 10,000, and suddenly you see that the goon squad's left. I say goon squad, but it actually works. So that's, for me, is kind of a revelation, because I think I tend to be more of let's have a big idea. But this was a small idea. It's a very beautiful, ancient idea that I think certain forces are trying to get out of us, which is that human connection is actually incredibly powerful. And for systemic reasons, we're kind of, in ways that are large and terrible and small and funny, we're subtly being coached that human connection is old news. There was, as a silly example, there was an AI commercial where there's a couple, and they're moving around the apartment, and it says, "Hey, ChatGPT, design a meal for me that says I'm interested but not ready for commitment." And then the menu runs on the screen, and you see them kind of interested but not committed, and I'm like, dude, that was your job to come up with that menu. That's what being a person is, And I think, that's actually how in writing, the way you get yourself into your book is to choose and choose and choose and take chances, Otherwise, there's no person in the book. So I think there's this tremendous amount of money that's being invested that means we have to want AI. In places, in math and science, I think it's very useful, but in writing, we don't need it. It's the humanities, and I don't. So I think there's a lot of what's the question? Oh yeah, so connection, human connection, and I think that's what I have faith in.
You talked a little earlier about, generally speaking, being oriented toward compassion, and you find it hard to judge other people. Mm. A lot of people find it really easy to judge other people.
Yeah.
And I wonder where you think the difference lies. If you take the example of a place like Minneapolis, there are people who think the good guys were the people trying to apprehend those who are in this country without permission, and there are people who think the good guys were the people standing up for those individuals. Where is that disconnect? Because both sides really believe themselves to be doing the right thing.
In that case, I think it's actually kind of political, which is that the they were not apprehending the people who had done bad things. They were apprehending anybody that looked like what they thought should be kicked out, brown people, So the whole idea that I think we get from right-wing media that they're just doing their job to enforce the law is not true, actually. They went way beyond what most people would. I mean, if you say to me, should we take a murderer out? Yeah, of course. But that's not what they were doing, and they were hiding behind that idea. So that the other idea that for me, I don't see this expressed much, but it occurred to me the other day that nobody living in this country has ever lived in a country where there were no undocumented people doing a lot of important work. So the whole beautiful life that I've had up to this point, incredibly, like high functioning, affluent American life, not a minute of that happened without a sizable number of undocumented people working. We literally don't know what the country would be like without that. So what are we trying to do? And when you factor in the fact that if we wanted to get there, we would have to be so cruel. And we saw a first taste of that there. So for me, I don't have a whole, I mean, thank you for saying I'm compassionate, but I don't have a whole lot of, but here's the thing, compassion doesn't mean bending over backwards to accommodate idiotic ideas. That's the opposite, There's this wonderful Buddhist teacher named Francesca Fremantle, and somebody asked her this question about what do you do with these people who seem to be bent on cruelty, who believe only in power, and she was so sweet. She said, "Well, whatever your belief is, if you believe in karma, very bad for them, If you believe in heaven or hell, not so good, But I'm kind of paraphrasing that, but then she said, I wouldn't wish their position on my worst enemy. So I think compassion could be somebody's trying to do a horribly regrettable thing. How do I stop them? Not with violence, but how do I, while maintaining my own standards, how do I interrupt that so they don't have the burden of that? So I think for me, that's kind of what happened in Minneapolis, I think, from what I know.
Author George Saunders is a winner of the Booker Prize and a MacArthur Fellowship. We spoke recently at a live event at the Dallas Museum of Art about his newest novel titled Vigil. Think is distributed by PRX, the Public Radio Exchange. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, anywhere you get podcasts, and at think.kera.org. Again, I'm Chris Boyd. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.